It's a question we wrestle with every few years when a new pop culture phenomenon comes along. When it comes to recreating history, how much liberty should the entertainment media be allowed to take? Now, as Netflix's The Crown moves closer to our current moment, that debate is resurfacing with a vengeance. Adam Riley has more.
Your Majesty.
Lush production, a great-looking cast, the high and mighty behaving very badly and then quite admirably, with countless countries and decades of history as the backdrop. Add it all up, and it's hard to imagine The Crown on Netflix not being a huge hit.
Pull yourselves together.
But now there's a Crown backlash brewing, focused on how the series portrays the late Princess Diana and her relations with her in-laws.
Charles resents me. Anne resents me. And is it possible that you resent me too?
According to critics like Charles Spencer, Diana's brother, the problem is simple. The show's narrative doesn't square with reality.
My Scottish grandmother was portrayed in this particularly unpleasant way, and that is not what she was like. She still has a daughter alive and still has 10 grandchildren alive. And is it fair for people to be destroyed in that way?
Frustration with The Crown taking liberties isn't new, but at first the show was accused of things like Prince Philip wearing the wrong medals. Now it's dealing with recent emotionally charged events, leading to much sharper pushback.
And I remember her telling me quite firmly that the Queen had been really great. Now, the Queen in this series of The Crown comes over as very cold, unfeeling.
What would you feel if you watched that and it was utterly without fact?
Still, Netflix is rebuffing the British Culture Secretary's call for a disclaimer identifying The Crown as fiction, saying viewers already know it's broadly based on historical events. And frankly, if the show stuck closer to the facts, it would probably be a lot less fun to watch.
Yeah, Callie, talk about overly sensitive. I mean, declaring it as fiction, it's a movie, folks, it's a movie. I was much more annoyed by Oliver Stone's JFK and some other things like that that sort of purported to give a revisionist version of history that we were all somehow supposed to believe was possible. I mean, that was dangerous in a way, but this is fun. It's entertainment.
Well, I think, and that would be my point. There is a scale, and sometimes Hollywood or whomever hits it, and sometimes they don't. Because my particular hobby horse is Mississippi Burning, which is a complete travesty. That was the summer that those three civil rights workers were killed, and they portrayed the FBI as the heroes, which is the exact opposite of what happened. So that wasn't a question of a few little medals being off or somebody's dialogue maybe not being correct. So I think they, can say, as they have, Netflix says, it's historical fiction, and people can do that. I will say, however, as an avid watcher of it, many times I say, did that happen? And you look it up, and it absolutely did.
I know. I did that a few times. I can't really watch it. I'm bored by it, but...
but I think it's interesting that they're being complained about, and they have actually stuck closer to the facts than most of these historical fiction biographies or event kind of produced things usually do. But so it's fascinating to me. I get it, because Charles is right. He doesn't want the grandmother portrayed as some evil woman, and she's not. That's a real person. I get it, but it's a little tough to figure that out if people want to take a little bit of license. Yeah.
Well, I agree with Callie. I watched the series in my COVID life, and I was constantly doing research to say, did that really happen? Yeah. And it was amazing to me the number of things that didn't happen. You showed the scene there, that absolutely ludicrous scene of Diana meeting Charles for the first time, dressed up as a tree from A Midsummer Night's Dream. Never happened. So, I may be in the minority on this, but I think they should put a disclaimer saying that some events portrayed were invented, or the timing or accuracy is, different than the history. I think the problem is with series like this, even though the vast majority of the people know it's historic drama, these are situations and things about real people. And when you conflate these fictionalized events with real people, and more people think about it and remember them, somehow that becomes the history for some people.
That's true.
And I don't agree with that. And, I've had to produce a documentary in the past where it was a completely nonfiction, and I used some scenes from archival footage. I had to put a disclaimer in so that the viewer would have some context and know what was real and what wasn't.
Well, we've had this conversation before, haven't we? I don't think they should put a disclaimer on it, but at the same time, I think that viewers ought to be smart enough to know that what they're watching is fiction. You know, Callie brings up Mississippi Burning. I would point to Spotlight, which is probably the gold standard for these types of movies. My particular bugaboo is A Civil Action about the Woburn toxic waste case, which is a complete travesty. Fundamentally, I don't really get the point of doing fiction with real people, or I should say characters based on real people, especially when most of them are still alive. This isn't historical fiction, it's current events fiction. And I don't really have much use for it. And I've seen one episode, and I barely made it through Awake.
Well, so I'm also not a regular viewer, so I guess we're not super representative, or I guess it's 50-50, so we're somewhat representative. But I mean, this feels silly to me. Like, are we going to have Lifetime put a disclaimer on Harry and Meghan, the royal romance? I mean, this sort of thing has been happening for years and years. People take liberties with the royals. And, you know, a little healthy perspective, these people aren't being devastated or destroyed. They're being depicted in a way they don't like. There are real enormous privileges that come with being a royal. This is a small price to pay for those privileges. And I mean, truthfully, like, you know, the interesting thing to me is this Charles scandal at the time was covered so virulently, and there was so much that was said in the media. And I'm sure a lot of that wasn't true. I mean, it's just the reality is that you sort of have to take all of this stuff with a grain of salt, and you have to trust the audience to have some understanding. And frankly, half this audience wouldn't know anything about any of this history if they weren't watching this. So at least it's educating people a little. That's the best it can do.
By the way, Callie, the one who I think has a case, forget the royals, is Margaret Thatcher. I mean, that is just ridiculous, the way she's portrayed as this haughty, you know, stuffy, snooty. I mean, you know, she had sort of a frozen hairdo, yeah, but she was smart. And, you know, Gillian Anderson plays her, and I find that just, those scenes unwatchable.
Well, she wasn't well liked, we have to say. So I think that's what Gillian was going for. Yeah. But I take your point, you know.
And the transformation from Gillian Anderson to Margaret Thatcher is a bit remarkable.
Yeah, I know. I love Gillian Anderson.